Therapy has become like my self-care. It is part of my good mental health. I don't think anybody, this is not what you asked me, but I don't think that therapy should just be for the crisis moments in your life. For me, it is part of every week, me having my self-care, self-improvement, and I think that it's an incredible tool.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sheri Jacobson, and this is THERAPYLAB, a podcast dedicated to therapy, thought, and the art of mental well-being. In this episode, we are joined by mental health advocate, speaker, and business owner Jo Love to talk about her life and work. Hello, Jo.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
My absolute pleasure.
How are you doing?
I'm a little hot. We have to say London is a little warm today, but I'm good. I'm very good. Yeah, it's nice to be able to say that because I just recently had a bit of a mental health dip, and it's really refreshing to be asked that question and not just be saying, "Yeah, I'm fine," and the eyes and not speaking the truth.
So what's been keeping you busy lately? And we'll go into recent emotional states.
Yeah, absolutely. No, of course, busy. So now what I do is I have a podcast myself, and it always has a mental health. It's what I wish I'd known, and it always has a normally always has a mental health.
And there's 3 of you on it.
Spin. Yeah, we've all got lived. Yes, so there's 3 of us who co-host, and there's we've all got lived experience in mental ill health, and so it often comes up, and because we could talk about all the things that we wish we'd known before we'd been through it. Sometimes they're things that we haven't been through yet, but we are trying to get an expert in and discuss, because I think there's real power, which is why I love podcasts, absolutely love podcasts, but I think there's real power in people sharing their stories and really connecting and helping, whether you're in a place to be able to listen to that story or not. I think something does go in, I think even if you think you're not in a place to listen to it, it does help. So I have
a great podcast, by the way. It is very it's raw material, and it's very engaging, and
we just sit down and chat.
Jolly.
Yeah, it was. I was being asked beforehand, do we do much editing? Do I do much research? And obviously, I know the guest that's coming in. But sometimes, if we're doing just the 3 of us and we're just doing an off-the-cuff topic, we don't think about it. We just press go and start talking, and then after half an hour, we stop recording. They might take out some ums and ahs and coughs and random noises that happen. We record it in central London as well. So you always get a bit of atmosphere. But no, other than that, it's like the raw, like you say, the raw conversation. And I absolutely love doing that. Events. And so I have an event that I haven't done for a while, but I really want to get back doing it. It's called T for PND. And I started doing these really early on in my journey of leaving law and entrepreneurial life. And it's normally about 10 to 15 women. You don't need to have had any kind of maternal mental health illness, but if you do, it's an open and safe space. We always have a mental health professional there in the room. I find it helps me because even though I'm very, very comfortable talking about mental health, and I've been trained as a mental health first aider and various other training, but I'm not a mental health professional. And I think it really helps knowing that I've got somebody who they're not there either to act as anybody's therapist, but they can just help make a safe, keep the conversation safe. And I think that's really important. And I'll come back to that, put a little pin in that one. And we get together, we share, and we just talk. And I think, again, it's that shared experience. And what I noticed really early, because I did it, I never wanted them to be big, because you don't share. I never wanted it to come in and have this guest speak, like that kind of, it just doesn't work. It's just women sitting in a room, having a cup of tea, having some cake, all the money goes to charity, don't pay my time. And I try and blag as much free as possible. So any free spaces, any free cake, any free tea. And so meaning everything, literally everything in the ticket price goes to maternal mental health charities. And I just think that's just so wonderful to be able to share.
talking and sharing seems to be the theme a lot of people are talking about in terms of the therapeutic, what makes therapy and the talking and sharing being two vital components.
Totally agree. And I think that that's one of the things that a lot of mental illnesses can do. It can isolate you and make you feel so alone, and there's power, almost like a negative power in that. And as soon as you can break out of that and get that connection with another human and realize you are not alone in this, and you haven't failed, and it's not your fault, because look at all these other people. And that was another thing. A lot of people who've come to my teas, they've said it's been really powerful because they've looked around the room at women that if they walk past them in the street would think that they totally had their, I don't know how to swear, totally had their shit together. And actually, I think it's really wonderful as women to realise that we don't, and that was another one of my campaigns that came out of actually some negative comments that I had online about how I was glamorizing mental ill health. Well, I said mental health, but yeah. And I'm like, I am absolutely not. I'm trying to normalize it. And then there was a really big campaign that really took some. It had some momentum going on it of depression wears lippy. It was a hashtag called depression wears lippy, and it was trying to show that it didn't need to be depression. Really, that was kind of an easy catch-all. But basically, the face of mental ill health doesn't look like the stereotype. I don't know the statistics. I want to say 9 times out of 10, but I don't know what the actual statistics are. But the majority of people are functioning with some level of mental ill health. We all have mental health. We all have mental ill health at some points in our life, whether there's a diagnosis or not. And it was that we're going to share our lipstick selfies in like solidarity and a little bit of a 2 fingers up to people who think that mental health and mental ill health looks a certain way, because a lot of us are affected and a lot of us walk around. And it's that old adage of you don't never quite know what somebody's going through until you walk in their shoes. And that tiny little word, fine, which we mentioned earlier, that is so easily trips off our tongue, doesn't it? I open myself and I try and be really honest. Yeah. So yeah.
But it is it's a conventional response to how are you?
Yeah.
Are you happy to describe what some of your burnouts were like?
Yeah, if I can, try and do it justice. It's terrible. It's so my most recent one was last summer, and I think it was there was a lot going on, and I was going to say I think it was triggered a lot by social media, but I think that was certainly, I don't know if that's the case. What I know is what made me better was taking time out of social media completely. So my therapist actually said to me, right, if you had a normal job, because I don't really quite know what I do, if you had a normal job, I would be saying you need to be signed off work right now. Like, you are not in a good place, you're burnt out. And for a long time, she'd been saying, I'm worried about you, I have concerns, And then it did culminate in me really not being able to function very well at all. Complete exhaustion the entire time. Just the constant pressure that I was putting myself, I like to say recovering perfectionist, but I'm certainly like A-type personality, high achiever, used to be a lawyer, like just used to pressure, and just don't ever think that I will snap, even though I know that I do. Anyway, so, and I think for me, one of my big triggers, I'm slightly veering off here, but one of my big triggers of burnout is having really no empathy. I'm a really empathetic person, and getting very annoyed by the simplest of things, requests from somebody. And I won't go into it because it's a private thing that happened, but basically it was something very small that wasn't in ordinary life a burden to me at all, or a difficult thing for me to perform or do. That made it sound worse than it was. No, it wasn't a difficult thing for me to carry out, but I couldn't do it, and it annoyed the hell out of me. And I'm like, why? And like, it felt like such an imposition. And I was like, why are they asking me to do this? Can't they see that I'm so, and it was at those, those things, it happened once and then it happened again. And it's when those things happen, I'm like, okay, yes, let's step back here. Something's going wrong. Mm-hmm. Because I was scraping from an empty barrel. There was nothing left to give. And I think social media for me at the time was really kind of, a mirror to that as well, because I was giving every single DM. I was answering every I was re-commenting, and I felt chained to providing content the entire time. I literally saw the algorithm as this gremlin in the room, and that if I didn't feed it content constantly, it was going to punish me somehow. And I didn't have a choice. It was the lack of choice. I felt that there was no choice. I have to be doing this. I have to be on social media. I have to be posting once a day. I have to be storing my entire life. I have to be. And it was at those moments in therapy that I was like, oh. And she was saying, my therapist kept saying, you have a choice. And I was like, no, I do not. So she said, right, let's try 1 week without social media. 1 week. You can still email. You can still do your job, even though I don't think you should. But let's just try 1 week without social media. And I ended up doing a whole month and not from her, because I just loved it, the freedom, and I needed it, and I knew I needed it. And it was almost being given that excuse, like kind of that prescription from my therapist. Like it was almost like, a non-medication prescription of like, you do have a choice. You don't have to do this. And so sometimes I've seen the friends that I've made online feeling very similar. And I do just want to say, you have a choice, you don't have to. But and burnout just feels terrible. You're exhausted. It feels very much like having depression. And I don't know where the line, you'll be able to be able to say more specifically where the line is. But I have had full mental breakdowns before, and it didn't feel, I felt similar, but not as extreme, maybe as a version of that, but just having nothing else to give.
And when was the first time that you accessed help, and who was it? How did you reach them?
University, and I have to say it was pretty disastrous. So I was at university, and there are a number of things that happened in my childhood and I think this is very normal, that when you go off to university for the first time, and you're on your own, and it all came flooding back to me, and I was depressed. And I went to my doctor initially, and I think you've got like 10 minutes with the doctor, don't you? And about an hour and 10 minutes later, she was like, okay, I think we need a referral here to the mental health services. So I had CBT at that point in time. And I have to say it was fairly horrendous experience for me. I think it was, and this is why I always say to people now, it's the connection between two humans that make it so wonderful. And I'm the biggest advocate of therapy going, or one of them. And it was the connection was not there. He was a highly strange person. And I think I wasn't trusting of the process because I didn't connect with him. I found the things he was saying, quite frankly, a little bit bizarre. And I didn't, and also because of that, I didn't open up. I didn't share anything. So it was never going to work. So.
And how many sessions was that for?
Well, I don't think I got to the end of them. I think it was supposed to be 6 or 8.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't think I got to the end of them.
And one other question, how soon did you know that the fit wasn't there?
Oh, like straight away. But I didn't know that was I'm now looking back as me now, who's like, I don't know, therapized is not a word, but very therapized, very in the mental health space and very aware. So I just recently dumped, I don't know how to say it, ended.
Very publicly as well on social media, so we can follow that.
I know, I was like, I'm going to do this. I was recording it before, and I was like, I'm going to release it after I've gone into the session, at least. So there's a tiny modicum of okayness about this. And I felt really empowered and informed over that decision. I didn't know that there was a decision to be made at that point. I didn't know that it was about the connection. I was feeling just like one massive failure at that point in my life anyway. So I just thought that it was just another thing that hadn't worked, and it was because of me. So no, it was very hard, which then made it much harder actually going back into that environment later in my life. So when I had postnatal depression, I had got to the point where I wanted to take my life. And even though I'd had a history of mental ill health my entire life probably, but for a long time I'd known that I'm probably a little bit more susceptible, or that it's a part of my life. I still didn't really flag it when I was even at that point of desperation. And I just thought, I'm just going to go and check with the doctor. And it was more that because I just thought motherhood was that hard. It's very difficult because before you're a mother, you hear it's also natural and it's, I don't know who's saying it, but you just get this impression that it's all going to be fine. It's all natural and you're going to love it and it's going to be brilliant. But you also do hear mutterings of, it's quite hard, it's the hardest thing you do. So when I was doing it, I was like, well, people say it's hard, so maybe they're just coping better with it being hard. And I'm not, but not because I have a mental health condition, but just because I'm flawed and that's always been there and that's the voice. So I must try harder. So I must do more. So I must get up even earlier before the baby's up. I must have no sleep whatsoever. I must go to I must basically lose myself entirely to this process, which isn't anybody watching, not the helpful thing to do. So anyway, I thought I'd just go in and check. And there'd been a big argument with my husband the weekend before. And weekends were seen as my saviour. I would just all week be clock watching and counting the hours, minutes, days, whatever we are in the week. And I'd have such Sunday night blues and such Monday morning holes. And we get to Saturday. And then of course it wasn't the salve that it needed to be. I wasn't then asking for or knowing how to communicate that I needed time. I'm the mother, I'm breastfeeding. I still was doing 70-80% of it all, and I felt like I couldn't ask for any time. Anyway, so we'd had a big argument because he wanted to go for a run, and I mean the mother of all. I can only describe it as a complete meltdown, and it was scary and difficult. And then from that came wanting to end my life and taking some steps, but I still, and then so I wheeled her into the doctor's surgery. The door just happened to be open one day as I was walking past. I hadn't meant to, but I thought, I'd obviously had a subconscious thought about it of like, I don't feel comfortable with this. So I went in, and weirdly there was no one. Normally when it was an open surgery, there was always 100 people in the waiting room, but there was no one there. And I'm sure I'm not misremembering it because I had a crier, so I would have known that there was a public display of crying that I couldn't cope with. Anyway, so I went into the doctor and I just sat down, and she's a mum of 3. And I said, I know motherhood's hard, but should it be this hard? And so we did the test, the checklist, and she's like, no, we need to get you some help. So then
just to rewind, the checklist being screeners for depression and anxiety, they usually use standardized questionnaires.
I think so. It's all a bit of a blur, but there was on a scale. I'm sure there was on a scale, or how often, your mood, and I do remember being asked about I think she used the word dark thoughts rather than suicide, and it seemed like she was going through some questions she was reading. So from something, I don't know if there's an Edinburgh test. I'm not sure if I had that or she was reading from something. Anyway, so she was like, right, okay, therapy. I think it was the 6 weeks of CBT that they were suggesting, a medication. And so previously I'd been it had been suggested that I should go on medication, and I'd always fiercely resisted it. But at that point, I didn't. I knew that I needed help. So very, very quickly my medication worked, and I do say that it really did save my life, and it isn't something I'm now on, but I was on it for quite a long time, and it did really, really help. So I know there's a bit of a debate of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but for me, at that point in my life, absolutely. But what it did is I think it put a sticking plaster over the problem. And so I very quickly felt better. And the 6-week course, it takes forever to actually get to see anybody. So that never actually materialised, because I was like, why would I go to therapy? Because I'm fine. I have nothing to talk about. And there's somebody who'll need it a lot more than I do. Plus I'd had this relatively terrible experience before. So I was like, it's fine. I feel fine now. Like, genuinely felt fine. Went back to work and realised that I wasn't actually fine. There's a number of things that went on then. But yeah, I quickly realised I wasn't fine. And that, at that moment, was a bit scary. And that was, oh, I actually do need something else. And
what work did you go back to?
I was a lawyer.
So you had a break from that?
Yeah,
you weren't
so I'd
running
had
the
my
business at the
maternity
time.
leave, yes. And so I was diagnosed with postnatal depression when my little girl was 10 months old, and I had a year's maternity leave. So it was only really quite fresh diagnosis when I was going back into law, and I was determined not to tell law. I didn't want, and law is probably one of the, I don't know, I want to say last, but I don't actually know. But I think it's a very hard environment, and it's one of the places. It's a place that you cannot fail. You cannot be less than perfect. You have to walk through those doors, and there are no mistakes. And I mean, from everything about your appearance, about what you say, about the full stop that goes on the email, even internally, even if it's a client is never going to see or know of such full stop being missing. You have to be perfect. So this was always this was the best profession I could have possibly have ever chosen, because I was a perfectionist, I was a people pleaser, I was a high achiever, and it just enabled that. And you just apply yourself more, and people give you credit for that, and then you get praise because you're a lawyer, like that's amazing. And it was just this virtuous at the time, but actually quite vicious cycle of being so consumed by perfectionism and getting everything right and having to get everything right and not allowing myself even a moment to breathe. So when I went off and had a baby, it was almost quite inevitable that things crumbled the way they did, because small people don't follow textbooks or rules or any of that, and neither does your mental health. So then when I came back in, having been at rock bottom, and going back through those doors, through those big glass doors, it just almost it was never going to work. It really wasn't. And, learning to be a good enough parent, but then having to and a good enough person, and then having to unlearn it, double negative, but forget that again when you walk in to a law office and put your lawyer hat back on. Very hard to juggle the two. You're either one or the other. And I was quite enjoying being good enough. And in some respects, I was really enjoying being good enough, and good enough being good enough. And then going back into law, it didn't work. So yeah, I realised I needed something else, some help. And it was through work that I initially saw my therapist, and then after I parted ways from my work, I carried on seeing that same therapist so I think it was good 2 years before I moved house and moved away and stopped seeing her. And she was the best thing that honestly ever happened. ever happened. She saw me through another suicide attempt. She saw me through eventually coming off medication, through various ups and downs, through the burnout, and through, EMDR. I did EMDR with her, which is eye movement
desensitization,
reprocessing. Yes, so I always forget what it is, which was incredible. And incredible to do it with somebody that I was already seeing and I completely trusted. It wasn't like I was going to see somebody for like 6 weeks.
And how does it actually work for those people who aren't familiar with it?
So EMDR, it's a trauma reliever. It's a trauma. It's trauma therapy, and they use it for, as you know, for soldiers. And I always thought PTSD was for people who had near-death experiences. My husband's ex-army, so I was aware of it, but I didn't think that I could have PTSD from postnatal depression, which is what I ended up having, and to the point where my triggers was sadly and awkwardly and unfortunately my daughter. So any time being alone with her would send me into, and I would have anxiety attacks if my husband just went to the loo for too long playing like whatever game he's playing, or if he was away with work and he anticipated him being away, even that anticipation of me having to be alone with her I don't even have the vocabulary to describe like how utterly debilitating that was, and it was terrible. So we realised that I had PTSD, which is it was so shaming as well. I was like, what mother? How awful must I have been as a mother? This is I don't think this anymore, but this is what I thought at the time. To not be able to spend time alone with your child, whatever rational reason you can give for it, which I can see. You see the causation and the chain of not being able to want to spend time with your child is heartbreakingly awful for her. Not that she knows, but for her, me for her, and also for me. So we did EMDR. And it was brilliant. So I think there's slightly different ways of doing it, but how we did it is we ended up focusing on more than one traumatic event, and we ended up going back to other things that had happened in my childhood. But the initial postnatal depression trauma that we focused on, she asked me to think of one particular memory. It could have been anything, but something that had emotional heat to it that I didn't like. And I actually thought about that fight that I had with my husband. Mm-hmm. And that was a very, very difficult memory for me to think about. Like, it really brought up a lot of emotional heat. I was riddled with shame and guilt that I'd done that to him, that I couldn't be there for her, the whole thing. And it was quite a nice encapsulation. And you really crystallise it. You do some work and you really crystallise this memory in your mind, and you make a still of it, and you really focus on it. Anyway, there's basically a light that is set up, or she had it set up on a tripod, and it was a light about a metre or so long, maybe a little bit less than a metre, and it looked like Kit from the Knight Rider, and she could have made it red, but she made it blue, and it would just go across and back. I remember her showing me the colour. She's like, red might be a little bit too like Kit from Knight Rider, but we went with blue. And she did some wizardry. I don't know what she did. She sometimes angle it and tilt it. Sometimes we did. I watched the light for longer, sometimes shorter. But basically, what it felt like was like the memory was my fist, and each round we'd kind of go down one of the channels, which would be a finger, and each round could be very, very quick or quite long. Some of them I found really physical, and some of them were more words coming, and she said just think of the process. So basically you just watch the light, she'll stop and ask various questions about either the memory or just what I'm feeling. And yes, so she always said, think of it, I don't think I thought of it like this, but this is what she said. Think of it like a train journey, and you're just watching things go past, and you can stop. Sometimes you might stop in a tunnel, or sometimes you might be at a tunnel, you can't see anything. Sometimes you might decide to stop. We can stop at any time. You can stop at the station, you can do anything, but just watch it, just see what comes past. For me, a lot of the work that I did with the postnatal depression trauma were very words-based, very things like guilt and shame, but working down some of the channels were really, really difficult. And basically, it's a very odd experience, because the light goes on and all of a sudden you can feel something, whether it's a physical feeling or maybe anxiety. All of a sudden, it's there, and as soon as the light goes off, it's gone. So you know something's happening, but you don't quite know
I've
what.
I've not had EMDR. Lots of years of therapy, but not experienced.
It's wonderful and so weird. And a lot of the things, when we looked at childhood things, and it's so interesting because I obviously didn't have the vocabulary that I do now. So a lot of it was more physical, and I would literally feel bits, like I could feel my brain. I mean, have you ever felt your brain before? I don't think so. What it ended up doing is distancing me from that. I can still remember. Oh, and it's sort of what it does is it puts you into apparently a similar state to REM sleep. You're not asleep, it's not hypnosis, you're completely awake, you're completely in control, doesn't feel weird. But it's that rapid eye movement that you get in REM, which is when you're processing your day, so it processes the trauma that you're thinking about, which is amazing. And it happens, a lot of it happens not in the room, it'll happen when you're away, but you don't know it. Like your brain just does, it's incredible. So how I feel now about that emotion, that memory that we've just been talking about, is I can still remember it all. It's all just exactly as clear as it always was, but it's kind of over there.
It's lost its charge.
It has no emotional heat to it. It's just like any other memory. It's just there. And how incredible is that?
And you ended your work with her and you started with a new therapist.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about how it was, because we often talk about starting therapy and how to choose a therapist.
Yeah.
How was it for you, and what was a preparation to end?
Oh, ending was so hard. But but we'd really prepared. So I knew I was moving, so I moved from London to Bath, and I knew I was moving, and therapy has become like my self-care. It is part of my good mental health. I don't think anybody, this is not what you asked me, but I don't think that therapy should just be for the crisis moments in your life. For me, it is part of every week, me having my self-care, self-improvement, and I think if we all had therapy, we would all just be such better humans. So
I'm with you on that, by the way. Everyone needs a therapist is our strap line.
Exactly, and it shouldn't be shameful or all the rest of it. But no, so I knew that I knew I was moving, and I knew that I needed a therapist in Bath, and I actually didn't tell my therapist for a while, so I was like, I'm going to leave it till after Christmas, when we're definitely going. And there was this moment, and I probably documented it on social media, of like, today's the day I'm going to tell her, and come out. And I was like, I did it. I mean, she was wonderful. And actually, I always think with everything, maybe not all therapists, but she was a fantastic therapist. And so it wasn't an awkward conversation, and it's almost the best possible person to give that news to. And it shifted our relationship a little bit, actually, because I think it made her open up a little bit more. She was always very open with me, which I liked, that style. But I think it did change things a little bit. Anyway, so we started from January, and I moved at the beginning of March. So all that time, essentially, we decided to stop EMDR, because we could have carried on. There's probably more lurking in there that I would have wanted to thoroughly flush out. But no. So we stopped doing EMDR. It was full talking therapy every week, and
Therapy Thursdays.
Therapy that
which is no longer.
Wednesday. I know my new therapist. She was like, I'm so sorry. Maybe it will be Thursdays.
My therapist is also on a Wednesday. So if you come up with a new line,
it was like wisdom, wellness, and I was like, no, they're just not as good as Therapy Thursdays. Maybe one day we'll think of something. No, she was brilliant. So that whole kind of almost 3 months, we planned the ending, and it not in a big way, but just gently easing into it.
So are you on the hunt for a new therapist, or are you going to take a therapy break?
No, so I have a new therapist who's amazing, but I had like an interim one. So when I first moved, I saw someone for 6 weeks, and set that all up when I was in London, and I'd asked for recommendations, and it wasn't a person recommendation, it was the practice, so there was a few different people. And it came up a couple of times, so I thought, this is good, we'll do this. And it just wasn't that click. Perfect.
Again, the relationship being absolute key to change.
And I really think it is. And I said it so often, but I think having had a really great therapist, part of me was like, was anyone going to be good? Like, was anyone going to be good enough? And there's that transference that's happening because my therapist was amazing. But I think now, because I have now got a new therapist, and she is incredible, totally different style, totally different personalities, but I click with her and it works. Right. So no, we had one in the middle, and yes, she was very lovely, but it just didn't work. So
you're back to regular weekly therapy, and that is a big part of your self-care. Now, you have a really big following on social media. You're helping a lot of people. You are normalizing it, you're humanizing it, and you have such a warm and magnetic personality, which does shine online. And at the same time, you know the destructive parts of social media, or how it can take a toll on its mental health. So you've got two sides. You're helping, and it's, I assume, beneficial to you on one level, and you've got the other side. How are you dealing with
It's a really good question. It's a really good question, and it's something that we talked earlier about my social media break. When I came back on, I knew that there were habits and boundaries. Habits I needed to stop doing, and boundaries I needed to put into place, because I hadn't got any boundaries, and that was part of the problem. And I think as people on social media with bigger platforms, I think, not that it's very funny you say that, because I think I have a tiny platform, but I think people who are out there who are trying to help people, which is what I'm trying to do, need to kind of lead by example. So being always on is actually not helpful for other people to then feel like they need to always be on. So I was like, right, I'm going to publicly put my boundaries up. My boundaries have changed, because they should be flexible, and also what works for me might not work for everyone else. So I always caveat that. But what I needed to do at the beginning was having a complete day. I used to call it Switch Off Saturday. So I had a hashtag. Yes, the irony of that's not lost, but I had a hashtag of I'm switching off, and so many other people have now started doing it. And like, I think there's like a clothing brand that started doing it, and I've totally forgotten who it is, and it's Saturday, and they don't call it Switched Off Saturday, they called it something similar, and I was like, I don't take the credit, but I'm like, that's brilliant, because that's what we need to be normalizing, that social media is not going anywhere. It just isn't. Instagram might, but social media is not. And we need to work out how we're using it, because we need to use it healthily, not unhealthily. So yeah, some of my boundaries are that I'm not going to try and reply to every single DM. I'll do what I can in the time that I have, but also I'm going to try and do it in business hours rather than find myself at 10 o'clock at night, which is what I was doing, or midnight, or whatever. I think that's very unhealthy. And then trying to have set times of the day where I'm not looking at it, really leaving my phone away from, it sounds silly things. Also setting limits. Your iPhone, most people, I'm sure the other phone providers have similar tools on the phone, but having social media blackout times, but also time limits. I felt I needed to. Now I feel that it's become a habit to not use my phone so much and not use my social media so much, that I don't feel that I need to have that Saturday off. I just naturally use it a lot less. But I don't need to be as strict with myself on my boundaries.
And Jo, I just love how you've come to knowing yourself and trying lots of different things and finding out really the things that work for you and keep you well for the times that you are. Exactly. And the strategies that you can try
and it has to change, and that's part of it. You can't rigidly stick to the same thing the whole time, because we are so complex, and also the things that we're facing are always constantly changing, so we have to kind of be adapting to it. So I've loved trying everything out this month. It's been really great, and there's things I definitely will carry forward. So yeah, it's been wonderful.
Well, on behalf of a follower and your audience in general, thank you for your transparency and honesty, because you are doing so much for making it relatable and for others to try and look after themselves as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If people want to look, I'm just going to say stalk you, but if people want to take a look at what you're doing, and where can they find you?
Yeah, so it's on Instagram. I've started Twitter. It feels very exciting actually. But I'm mainly on Instagram, and it's LobellaLoves_Jo, which was my old name. At some point I might go over to Jo Love, which is my name, but I built up the brand under the old name, so I'm keeping that for the time.
And T for PND?
T for PND, watch this space. I'm very, very hopeful that there'll be another one very soon. It's in the pipeline. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us, Jo.
Thank you for having me.
HarleyTherapy.com is here to help you book counselling with qualified professional therapists online or in person at the times and prices that suit you wherever you are worldwide. If this is your first listen to Therapy Lab, do hit subscribe to keep up to date with new episodes. We'll see you next time.